All right, and I'd invite you to take your Bibles and go back with me to the book of Proverbs, chapter 18, as we go through the book of Proverbs, really verse by verse, but in a few more minutes on some verses than others, but are at least taking a brief look at every verse. And we're going to be picking up in verse number 15 this evening, but I would like to back up for just at least a few minutes and touch base and make sure, give a little bit of a review where we were at last week and kind of hit this week with a run and start. We did start in verse number 9 and talked about really two different aspects. You see them captured there. I'm not going to reread every verse we talked about, but talked about wastefulness and being lazy, and talked about just really some ways that are some things that we needed to think about, some things that we needed to consider when it came to our jobs, and the way that we provide a way of living for ourselves and take care of ourselves, and just the way, the attitude that it ought to be there, and contrasted and compared that with somebody who's wasting, and really kind of rolled that over into taking care of what we do have, right? And maintaining what we have to the best of our ability. You know, everything gets old and breaks and this is done with at some point, but it's one thing for something to just get old and wore out, and something to not be maintained and basically rust out. And it can be a challenge. I was even thinking kind of in specific context of this message. I figured it again earlier this week. I drive 25,000 miles a year just to work and back in my car. And the good thing about it is one of the things that's broken on my work car is the odometer, so I don't really know how many miles I have. I know I'm at least to 200,000, right? And I kind of keep track of it other ways and have a rough idea. And I'm like, and you know, if you get into it, you'll be like, yep, this feels like a work car, right? But even when you have things that are kind of designed in that direction, doesn't mean you still shouldn't take care of it, right? And to the best of your ability. I mean, I'm probably not going to spend $2,000 on a paint job on the car. I'm not saying if you want to do that, but you should still maintain things. And really, there's a Christian duty to do so. We should be known for that, and we should give some industry to things like that. Then we move to verses 10 through 12, and it was definitely my intention. We looked at those as a group together, and how they kind of contrasted and played with each other, and really contrasted what a righteous or a wise man puts their confidence in, and what a foolish man puts his confidence in. A rich man, I think there's some interconnection between some of the concepts here. And I was even thinking, Brother Jeremy was talking about some things going on at his work, and I've never worked for a company. I've always worked for a contractor. You're like, well, don't you work for a company? Yeah, but it's not this. When I say I don't work for a company, if you've been a contractor, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? We joke. I think it's a joke, like, we come in any day and they let us all go, right? And get another company in there. We're not doing any more projects. And so we all kind of live under that. And I'm like, oh, so the company guys live under that too a little bit, huh, right? And I only mention that to say this. You can't be dependent upon that. It doesn't matter how secure you think you are. You're one bad quarter away from your company failing, right? All of us kind of live under that reality. And so that can't be our strong city. It can't be our tower. And we contrasted the concept of running to the Lord, running to the name of the Lord, and we are safe, right? Versus living in a place that feels safe, maybe even appears safe, but in reality actually isn't. And we attempted to tie that to verse number 12, where it talks about haughty and humility, and tied that idea of haughtiness, which is really just an idea. It carries the idea of pride, but more specifically, it's talking about that idea of being lifted up, right? That putting yourself high, and contrasted that with the word, especially in verse number 10, the word safe, which basically means to lift somebody out of trouble, right? And so you can either put yourself on high, think you're safe, think you're okay, or you can run to the Lord with that. We then spent a few minutes on verse number 13, talking about maybe you ought to slow down and listen to what's going on before you interject something, right? And make sure you have information, make sure you know what's going on, and talked about how not doing so, there's negative consequences really attached with that every time. We can almost, I'm gonna kind of lay down a general rule that I'm not gonna necessarily deny the existence of any caveats or circumstances that may tweak it, but you can almost never go wrong by waiting to give a response until you make sure you know what you're actually responding to make sure you know what you're answering. And we're better off doing that, making sure, letting people tell what they need to tell, And that way we make sure we're getting the right answer to things, right? Because that really is the thing. We're wanting to answer a matter. That is kind of the goal. And really more than answering a matter, we also want to answer a matter accurately, responsibly, and with some integrity, if you will. And then we wrapped up in verse number 14, the spirit of a man will sustain his infirmity, but a wounded spirit who can bear. If you recall, we actually ran a few cross references in the book of Proverbs, all before chapter 18, really just driving home the point that the state of your spirit, the condition of your heart is inextricably linked to basically the way you're going to feel as a person. I don't know that we can go so far as to say that if your heart's happy, you're never going to have any medical problems. I don't think anybody thinks that. That's not the point of it. But what I am saying is that your spirit, your mindset, your soul, the state of your heart has a direct and immediate and real effect on how you feel in a physical sense. Proverbs, I would argue, I'm trying to think of other books off the top of my head. I would argue that Proverbs probably almost in an isolated sense argues that. I think we looked at like 9 or 10 cross references. Again, we kind of ran through them, but this is an oft repeated phrase or concept that we have in Proverbs chapter 15. That brings us to verse number 15, where we're going to pick up tonight. We'll see if we get through the end of the chapter. It's probably unlikely, but we'll see how it goes. Verse number 15, read it with me. The Bible says, "The heart of the prudent getteth knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeketh knowledge." I've entitled this verse, "You Have Exactly What You Want." I really want us to take away one concept from this verse. I have like 6 points, but it's kind of one concept, all right? And so what I want us to take away from this is I'm going to use the term self-improvement, and I'm using that in its most biblically, theologically correct, scripture-saturated context, right? Because I realize when you say the word self-improvement, Joel Osteen comes to mind, right, from a theological perspective. And then, you go to the self-help book of books, self-help, I don't even know if there are bookstores anymore, but back in the old days when I grew up, right, you go to bookstores and they would have a self-help section, right? And that's not what self-improvement section, that's not what I'm talking about. I think as Christians, as Bible believers, there ought to be a very real aspect of which we're always trying to improve ourselves. I would argue, I'm not really going to argue from the Bible, I'm just kind of make the statement and move on, that from a biblical perspective, this is almost an inherent command upon us. A Christian ought to be always improving oneself. And I think in verse 15, it gives us a few things to think about. And did I ever give you the main point? I don't know if we did. We'll give it to you right here. It begins on the inside. Let me give you 2 words, and then we'll kind of break some of this stuff down. It says the heart, right? I'll see that, the heart. And then it talks about the ear. And now I realize the ear is an external, is it an organ, Alicia? It's not an organ. It is an organ, right? But never mind. She's taking all sorts of tests on the ear this week, right? So even though your ears are on the outside, there's still a sense in which you're taking things in, right? You're amassing the information. So all of this starts on the inside. So biblical self-improvement begins inwardly. It says the heart of the prudent man getteth knowledge. The word heart here matters. We could spend 45 minutes just talking about the word heart in the Bible, right? And kind of breaking down what it means when it says it in different places. And I've probably done that at some point. I know pastors danced all around it, if not done it, right? I feel like he's definitely done it. He preached a series through Proverbs talking about wisdom, instruction, and knowledge, or some combination of those 3, right? And I know he touched on that. So we're not going to really focus on that. I'm just simply pulling that into our mental state right here, because it's more than just data collection, right? It's more than just bringing things in and kind of putting things in a file and organizing things. It's more than that. It's a prudent man, that's what's talked about here, has an inward disposition towards knowledge, right? Towards knowledge. And so what that means is it's not just a matter of I'm trying to gain information. I'm trying to gain information that will provide me with knowledge, right? Because how could you explain this? You could probably study to pass a test on something you know nothing about, right? You could memorize terms. You could memorize, right, Alicia? You could definitely pass a test on something you know, right? So you could memorize terms. You could memorize definitions. You could read the book. You could memorize facts and figures. You could memorize dates and pass a test. but not necessarily know anything about it. Maybe to an extreme example is, taking a test on physics or something, right? Again, you could read a glossary, you could memorize terms, memorize formulas even, and be able to recall them on command. But even you would say, well, I don't really know nothing about physics. I just know how to study for a test, right? So this is the difference on what we're talking about. It's not just I have the ability to read something and memorize it. It's how does this actually apply to me? How does this actually impact my life? It's one thing to know was it Einstein or Newton? The E-M, Einstein, what is it? Somebody know it off the top of their head? Right. So it's one thing to be able to quote that. It's another thing to be able to, well, give me an example on what exactly that means in the real life, in the real world. Like, how does that apply to motion or the acceleration of a car or the relativity of the speed of light when you're at, right? And you're like, well, I just know E, right? I just know how to quote the little thing, right? And that's the difference, what I'm talking about. We can do that theologically. We memorize verses. Thy word have I hid in my heart that I might not sin against thee. Wherewith also the young man cleanse his way by taking heed thereto according to thy word. All scripture is given by inspiration of God, is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. And I honestly, I didn't have that. Like, I just quoted that, just pulled out verses on a specific subject. And my guess is, I look around, most of y'all are very familiar with them or could probably quote them too, right? But have you always lived according to them? Everybody shake your head? No, right, it's not true. And so all I'm saying is that's the difference between being able to memorize information and having a heart that desires knowledge, right? I can memorize a Bible verse. Listen, if you wanted to try, you could memorize the Bible. You could. Most of us could, right? I don't know if I could, but you understand what I'm saying. If you tried, you could memorize more of the Bible than you know right now at bare minimum, right? But it would not necessarily affect your life. Right? There's lost people that have Bible memorized, right? So it's got to be more than that. The heart of the prudent getteth knowledge. I would argue that it's not just that you're forced to learn, it's that you want to learn. Amen. Right? You can come to church because you're supposed to, and you can sit here and you can take notes if you want to. You could do it, and you're like, well, I'm doing it. I'm here. I'm listening. I'm getting it, and maybe even gaining information. But if your life is never being affected, you're being forced to learn things that you have no interest in applying them to our heart. A prudent man wants to learn. The inner man is desiring truth. The prudent man improves because his heart is teachable. I would simply ask you, is your heart teachable tonight? Or, I've been in church for 30 years. I've been in church for 50 years. I've been in church my entire life. I know all of this. The heart of the prudent, it getteth knowledge. Every service I come to, I'm trying to get knowledge from it. I'm looking for the nuance, right? Think about it. How long has it been since you sat in a service here and heard something you've just never heard before in your entire life? I don't know how long you have to be here before. That's probably not going to be very likely, right? I've heard messages on Job. I've heard Romans preached through. He's about to get to Romans 5, 6, 7, 8, and he preached a series. It was, I don't know how long ago, quite a while ago, and preached through 5, 6, 7, 8, or 6, 7, and 8, or something like that. Because I remember he talked about how he felt like the whole book of Romans is good, but it's like the cinnamon roll, and 5, 6, 7, and 8 is like the center of a cinnamon roll. It's like the best part of the best thing, right? And so I remember that series, but I'm going to sit through Sunday school, and of course I remember that, right? And so I'm going to sit through that. I'm going to sit through this again. I've heard it. Have any of y'all ever, have you preached through Proverbs verse by verse? Did time ago. I figured that was probably our bare minimum. I know you used to do stuff on Wednesday called Pearls from Proverbs, and they ended up being a lot bigger than pearls. I'm just going to say like that. They were going quite the run on. They were supposed to be shorter, but anyhow, I digress, right? And Brother Jeremy's preaching on Adam and Eve. I've heard messages on Adam and Eve. I don't know that I've ever heard one on Lamech, though, just to be perfectly honest. I'm sure it's been addressed, right? So that was a pretty original take on stuff, right? But all I'm saying is, it's not like he read the story of Lamech. I'm like, well, that's a very interesting story. I've never seen that. It's Genesis 4. You don't even have to read your Bible very hard to get through that, right? This is pretty easy to get to, but it's more than that. We're not going to always, we have to discipline ourselves to come to church and say, I need more knowledge, I need more information, and not just so I can go and say, I now know what Proverbs 18:15 talks about. It's like, what does this mean in my life? We'll be lucky to get through verse 1 at the rate we're at the first verse. Okay, so we probably should Let's see here. Let's just move to this. Biblical self-improvement requires listening. We'll kind of look at the second part of the verse. And the ear of the wise seeketh knowledge. So we're shifting from the heart to the ear. A wise man has a trained ear. And you have to be able to, you have to sometimes train yourself to be able to get something from something. I listen to audiobooks like constantly, right? I'm a top 10% listener on Audible for the last 3 months running, right? So I listen to a lot of audiobooks going to and from work. And I lean heavily towards World War II and Civil War and biographies, presidential biographies. That's where I lean towards. And so I decided second half of the year I'm going to try to branch out a little bit. So I'm listening to a book called Blood and Iron. It's German history from like 1815 to 1917. And it's pretty thick stuff, I'm not gonna lie, right? It's like, one of the people is Wilhelm, like that's blood right there, brother, right? So I recognize some names, Brandenburg, Bismarck. Names are generally familiar, but only because Adolf Hitler named battleships after these dudes, right? Like not because I know anything about them. And so I'm listening to it, and I'm like, I'm kind of lost, to be perfectly honest. I'm not sure what we're talking about. It's a part of the world. My ear's not trained for that type of stuff, but we watched the Civil War documentary, and I was quoting Grant letters to Lincoln, right? Like I'm pretty familiar with the Civil War, right? I have my ears trained for that. I can hear Lee wasn't writing Lincoln. Grant wrote Lincoln, and they could start a letter, and I not every letter, but I'm familiar enough to where, hey, he talked about this, or he used this line. My ear is trained for that. We ought to want our ears to be trained for truth, for what's right, to where we hear truth, we hear messages, we sit in church and our ears just like, I recognize that and I can fit it in. But we got to work on that. This doesn't just come naturally. I don't expect myself to become an expert on late 19th century German history, just for the record. It's not interested in much training there. So yeah, let's see what else. Let me give you a caveat before we move on. I mentioned it kind of at the outset. Biblical self-improvement is not self-worship, right? It's not about, I just want to be better so I can be better. It's about trying to cultivate myself to be more spiritual, more like my Savior, more like Christ. I would also give you this. Let me give you this, and then we'll move on to verse number 16. A prudent man improves because he admits he lacks. If you come to church and think you've heard everything, you're never going to gain anything from church. And I think that, especially looking at the group that's here tonight, this I don't know if it is a problem, but it could be a problem because we're all so familiar. We're so not entrenched. I mean, yeah, but we're so familiar. I used that one already. There's got to be another adjective. We're so comfortable, and we're all moving in a sphere that we're very familiar with. We have to be careful we don't just sit and tune stuff out because we think we already know it. Verse number 16. Let's try to cover at least 2 verses tonight. All right, verse number 16. A man's gift maketh room for him, and bringeth him before great men. So I read this verse, and let me read it again just to make sure we're all the same. A man's gift maketh room for him, and bringeth him before great men. So this is I'll just give you kind of my initial reaction, and then we'll kind of walk through, I think, maybe a way to understand it. I'm like, okay, my opinion, it sounds like bribes, right? That's my initial thing. And I'm like, well, I can't tell if he's saying this is a good thing or a bad thing. And so I think the fact that you can't necessarily tell it indicates to us what kind of proverb this is. I think it's literally is a statement of reality, right? There are definitely proverbs that it's not really necessarily casting a moral judgment in that proverb as much as it's saying this kind of is what life is like. Because you think about this, a man's gift maketh room for him and bringeth him before great men. That's an accurate statement. If you're willing to grease the wheels of capitalism, right, you can get yourself into places. But I also think that there's nothing wrong. And let me back up here. So every once in a while on verses, most of the time I don't look at commentaries. I don't have anything on commentaries, but this is kind of the way I generally look at it. If you wanted to know what the commentary said, y'all could have gone and looked up the commentary yourself, right? So I'm trying to be original to a point, right? But every once in a while, like, yeah, that's weird. And without fail, so I looked this verse up, and nobody else really knows what it means either, right? It completely the widest range of it. Some people say it's a condemnation of bribery. Other people saying it's a statement of fact, or even saying that good can come from it. So what I'm saying is I think you can almost take it anyway and gain some validity from it. So let's think about it from a bribe standpoint. Proverbs actually talks quite a bit about bribes. I don't know if I have the verse. I do have the verse. Proverbs 7. We just looked at it probably a year ago at this point. Proverbs 17, verse 23. A wicked man taketh a gift out of the bosom to pervert the ways of judgment, right? So I think this would be a negative application of it. He is giving something in order to move the needle on what he wants. And not just in a trying to gain favor sort of way, but he's actually trying to maliciously, intentionally corrupt judgment, right? He's like, I know this is what you should do. This is the right thing to do, but I'm going to pay you to do something else. And the reality is, you've probably heard the phrase, everything's for sale if the money's right, right? And while there's a sense in which that's not true, there's a very large sense in which it is true. Most people cave for money. Most people, for the right amount of money, they'd sell their own mother, right? Like this is generally tends to be the case. And so the fact is and this is where the danger lies, because if you just take verse 16 as kind of a statement of fact, a man's gift maketh room for him and bringeth him before great men, say there's a method of success to this end, right? I have money, I get before great men. I have a gift, I can make room for him. So I think that the way where I come down on this verse is Solomon is not saying this is righteous. I think Solomon is saying this is real, right? This is kind of the way that the world actually works. So there's a few things to do. Gifts have influence. Gifts have influence. A gift is not neutral in human relationships. It changes posture, mood, and access. Let me give you an example. We'll take Brother Jeremy. Brother Jeremy called me 24/7 and said, I need a hand with this. I can't imagine a certain circumstances where I wouldn't drop anything I could possibly drop and go to wherever Brother Jeremy was at, right? So let's pretend like that wasn't the case. But let's say that every week, Brother Jeremy came and just gave me a gift of $500. Every week, $500. Now, that's not an awful lot of money, but I'd take it. right, don't get me wrong. It's enough money to where I'll take it. And it's enough money to where then when Brother Jeremy comes and says, hey, I need help with this, be like, well, if I don't go help him, he might not bring me $500 again. Right? He's like, I guarantee you I won't bring you $500, right? Because the fact is he's paying for something. Right? And I've told Elisa this. She just started to work and be the word. I said, nothing is free, right? Like if you may not see where the cost is at, but when there's nothing free. She was, and her boss has paid for her first semester or something at college. And she's like, he's giving it to me for free or something along those lines. I said, it ain't for free. He wants you to keep working for him. Because now what are you going to do, quit? Like you could. I mean, there's no legal document, but I'd feel bad about you quitting, right? Like, right? And so even if it's not a legally binding document, there's still pressure brought to bear by money. Right? I mean, and that even works at our jobs too. You ever have any safety rules at work you think are ridiculous? I do every once in a while. I understand the concept behind most of them. Truly, I do. I don't necessarily love them. But you know what? Nothing makes me more safety than getting paid. Like, what do you want me to wear to do this? Like, I'll put on hat, I'll put on goggles, I'll wear long sleeve shirts in 100-degree weather, I'll wear rubber boots if I have to. I mean, I don't have to do most of this stuff anymore, but I would, right? I'm just saying that you pay me the right amount of money, and from a work perspective, you get me to do about anything. Right? Have you ever driven by anybody and be like, they didn't pay me enough to do that? They could pay you enough to do it. Yeah, I guarantee you they could pay you enough to do it. I don't know what the number is, but it's probably a lot low enough to where you ought to be embarrassed about what you'd be willing to do for that amount. All I'm saying is money, gifts, this type of thing, it changes people. And we should be careful that we're not changed by it. And we should be careful that we don't use money or influence to change people with it. Influence has danger. What begins as a courtesy can become leverage. What begins as being nice can become control. Really what this ultimately, before we move on, is justice should not be for sale, right? When a gift, anything along those lines, begins to touch and poke and prod at, trying to get justice to be undone, it's crossed into wickedness. That is a biblical principle that we find often in the book of Proverbs. Verse number 17. When it sounds good in your head, read verse number 17 with me. He that is first in his own cause seemeth just, but his neighbor cometh and searcheth him. He that is first in his own cause seemeth just. I think this a little bit comes back to passing judgment, verse number 13. Yeah, verse number 13, maybe tied a little bit to that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but just that idea of hearing things. So, he that is first is in his own cause. Let me start again. He that is first in his own cause seemeth just. Let me give you an illustration to understand what this verse is telling us. So, let's how can we give an example? I don't have one written down. It's like, okay, a kid comes into his parents, and it's like he says, me and my sibling were doing this, that, and the other, and the window got broken, and I had told I told my sibling that we shouldn't be doing this, and this happened, and this completely went bad, and I told him not to do it, and he did it, and then I told him I was going to go tell you, and he got really upset at me, and he tried to stop me, and I knew it was a bad idea to begin with. He just wouldn't listen to me, and you're like, and the parent could be sitting there like, that little renegade. That little renegade. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperate. And the other one come in and say, yeah, but he threw the ball. Right? And so what I'm saying is, if you get to talk first, you can make almost anything sound good. Right? He that is first in his own cause seemeth just. You ever had anything happen and you'd be like, I want to be the first one to tell how this went down. Right? Because if you have ever heard yourself saying that, I want to tell the boss first. I want to tell mom and dad first. I want to tell the pastor first what went down. Basically what you're saying is I intuitively understand the first person that gets to tell their side of the story sets the tone for the narrative. Now what this verse is saying, when you only hear one side of the story, you can say anything you want that sounds right. It says, but his neighbor cometh and searcheth him. And by searching him, I'd like you to more have the idea of a police officer ripping somebody out of a car, pushing them up against the side of it and saying, do you have anything on you that's going to stick, poke, or otherwise hurt me? And they're like grabbing them and pushing on them and checking everything. That's the type of searching we're talking about, right? Like he's not just like he's like, I'm trying to find out something here. So think about it from a legal perspective. It's like the prosecution gets to go first, right? And then, the prosecution rests in the defense. Like, I think that's right. And so, I don't know. I sat on jury on one trial. It was long enough ago to where I really remember very little about it, other than the prosecution did not do an adequate job. So, it's like you're sitting there, you're in the jury, you're listening to the prosecution, and they come out, and they put a police officer on the stand, they ask him questions. And we'll just kind of ignore the cross-exam. It's an illustration. It's not perfect world, right? And they bring all these witnesses. They bring an expert witness. They bring an eyewitness. They show photographs. They show ballistics. They show this. They show DNA. And you get done. The prosecution gets done. It's like, man, that dude is guilty. And then but the defense hasn't even had nothing to say yet. And then they get up there and they show incontrovertible evidence, I'm making a complete story up, that the man wasn't even in the United States when the affair happened. Have pictures of him in overseas and plane tickets and eyewitnesses from Uber and video cameras showing he wasn't even here. And all I'm saying is you can say anything you want if nobody's challenging you, right? And so this right here is important for us. This would be our takeaway, right? He lays this out. I think this is our takeaway. Don't be so sure you have all the information if only you've heard the tale of one person, right? Because one person talking can say anything, and we need somebody to come up and throw them against the car and say, do you have anything that's going to stick, poke, or hurt me, right? Like, we're going to find out what's going on about this case. And make sure that you don't just want to be first so you can basically sway the narrative in an inappropriate and wrong way. Look at verse number 18 with me. The lot causeth contentions to cease, and parteth between the mighty. The lot causeth contentions to cease, and parteth between the mighty. I would argue, just a few thoughts on this verse. You can't complain about what can't be controlled, right? Does that make sense? You can't complain about what cannot be controlled. He's arguing there's no bias, and he uses the term lots here. But the word lots, it's a pretty broad word. It's just kind of the idea of what from a human perspective, kind of looks like random chance. Drawing straws, throwing a dice. It's the idea of... it's weird growing up. I don't remember it happening, but maybe it's because I was always one of the plaintiffs and not one of the judges in the situation, right? But it's like with kids and stuff, it's like, why is there never 3 of anything, right? There's always 4 or 2, and like nothing ever just works out right. Everything should be sold in sets of 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 8, right? Multiples of 3. If I want some multiples of 4, if Heather wants some multiples of 5, right? And so, it's one of those things of like, think about it. Because there's a mental reality to what this verse is saying. So we have 2 of something left, or we have 1 of them, and I'm like, you know what? Hannah gets it. Well, now Rebecca and Elise are going to be like, well, that's not fair. What is Hannah getting? Hannah gets it every time. Probably because Hannah this and Hannah that. And if they knew But you know what? We've done this before. It's like somebody do rock, paper, scissors to go get eggs, right? Right. Somebody's going to go get it. I'm not selling anybody, right? But if you do rock, there's not a little bit. If you're good at rock, paper, scissors, you can win, right? But at any rate, it's like flip a coin, and then it's very hard to be mad at a coin, right? It's very difficult to say, well, that wasn't fair. You have just as good a chance as anybody, right? Isn't it weird how no matter how many times you flip a coin, it's always a 50-50 chance, right? But at any rate, right? So what he's saying here is this really takes the controversy out of making a decision, right? I didn't say Hannah could have it. The almighty quarter said she could have it, right? Don't be mad at me. You had just as fair a chance as it does remove bias, right? It removes being unfair and everything. It's just that aspect. And I would argue that he's also saying that there's a benefit to this. Because it says it parteth between the mighty. Because the thing is, you get enough strong people that are going, like, you go to blows and get upset and have fights over it. And he's like, listen, we can do it like this and nobody can be upset about it. I would think there's a few things to learn from that. From kind of a corporate standpoint, we're not casting lots and things of that nature anymore. But to the best of our ability, we ought to be looking for ways to where there's no bias that can be made into decisions that we're doing. I wouldn't, if you're in charge of people or whatever, I wouldn't advise flipping coins in front of them like, so who's going to get their weight right? I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is the goal ought to be to remove kind of this bias that can be built in there. I reminded, I think it was Achan. And remember how they cast lots and cast lots and cast lots. And what's weird is when Achan was standing there, it's like the first lot, like it put him on the losing side or the winning side. You're like, ooh, that's not good. And it went down to tribe, and it went down to family. It's just like, oh my God. It's like part of you standing there like, please don't let it be right this time, right? As it gets closer and closer. But then when it gets to you, it's a completely random. And again, you could preach a message on lots in the Old Testament, how God used that, but just kind of taking it at face value. When those lots finally got thrown, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 times. I don't remember the exact, tribe, family, down to Achan. And it came before Achan, and it did. He couldn't say, well, that's not true, and he's lying about that, and that's not fair. And he's like, you can't even say anything about it, right? Because it was really just a manifestation of God in that sentence, in that way. Let's see here. But let's look at verse 19 and try to get a few more verses in here. Verse number 19. A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city, and their contentions are like the bars of a castle. It really is a difficulty everywhere acknowledged. I think we can all probably universally accept the fact that a brother offended is indeed hard to be won. It's a lot of times more easy to reconcile between strangers than those that are united by ties of blood when something goes wrong. You ever gotten upset at a coworker, something went wrong, and just like, I don't really like you very much right now, right? And that's happened to really in my entire, I've been working I've been having jobs since I was 15, so I'm at 25 years or so of working with people. Like, I think I can count on one hand the number of times that there was actually a legitimate issue between me. And really, I can only think of one. I'm just assuming there were a couple in the past. And, it's like, I don't want to talk to this person. But, now it was relatively recent, but a year or so later, it's like nothing had been happened, right? He's moved on, I've moved on, given him a ride to the gate before and talked about kids and just don't even care anymore, right? That day it was kind of a big deal, what was going on, right? But you ever had a family member that tried to get over something like that, right? It's like, what ought to hold us together tighter does until it breaks, right? And then it's even more difficult. A brother offended harder to be won. It's aggravated in that it's almost like the bitterness that's brought up is more intense. What was I reading? I was reading something that talked about that the fullness of the love is inversely proportionate to the greatness of the anger, right? It's like the closer you are to the person, when you get crossways with them, it means all the more because of the depth of the relationship that you once had with them. And, it's talked about a brother here. I think that there's definitely truth to that. I mean, we live in a world, and it's not like it's a new thing, but where people, how many times have you heard, perhaps you even know people, I'm not saying me, I'm just saying people, I haven't talked to my sibling or my brother in 10 years, or I haven't talked to my parents in 30 years, and great ghosts of time, and these are people you grew up with, probably once would fight for. And something happened, and I'm not even passing judgment on the legitimacy of any interaction that took place. I'm just saying this is a reality, right? When things go bad between brothers, and I would argue that we can extrapolate that out just slightly. Any type of close relationship, church members, extended family, all of this happens, and it's almost like let's make it applicable to us. We shrink from humbling ourselves before people that know us the best sometimes. Not all the time. I'm trying to make something applicable to us, because reconciliation a lot of times means an apology. You ever waited for an apology and waited and waited and waited, still waiting? And a lot of times you can wait for the rest of your life. And my guess is, I'm speaking generally, right? There's a lot of relationships that are very complex. But my guess is for every person that's waiting for an apology, there's somebody else that's waiting for an apology too. Now, one of them may be wrong. Both of them may be wrong. But I'd say by and large, if you're sitting around saying, well, they need to apologize to me, there's a very good chance they're sitting at their house tonight saying the exact same thing about you. Again, I'm not passing judgment on who's right and who's wrong. Of course you are, right? We all know that. What I'm saying is the reality is that most of the time when there's a lack of reconciliation, it is also a lack of humility and an apology. And it's almost like we don't like to humble our hearts before someone whom we've had so much to do with, right? It's hard, you could apologize to a coworker. It's not that big of a deal, right? I haven't known him for that long. Probably won't know him for that much longer, right? It's not that, I'm sorry, man, I shouldn't have said that, shouldn't have reacted like that. But I ain't saying that to my sibling. I ain't saying that to a church member. They should have known better. They shouldn't have done that. There's a high, and we got all these reasons, and it's hard to be one. We're much more inclined to stand where we're at. Oh, here we go. I'm just trying to make it personal tonight. Thinking the other person should make the first move. And here's where the danger is. You're convinced that you're in the right. Maybe you are. Maybe you're not. The younger, let me give you an example. The younger thinks the elder should because, well, you're older. And the older thinks the younger should because, well, you're younger, right? It's like no matter how you want to spin it, it's always up to somebody else to do it. And let anybody try to fix it, and you'll be like, stay out of my problems, right? It's difficult. A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city. It's almost like, would you rather go try and take uranium from Iran or go apologize to your brother? And you're like, Are we jumping out of a plane or doing a water insertion? Right? Like how are we going to do this? Right? Like anything but go apologize to a family member. And I intentionally interject levity into that, but I'm still trying to illustrate a point that can be true a lot of times in our life. We'd rather do anything than go apologize. And oftentimes, even if you were the more aggrieved party, let me just ask you it like this. Can you find anything you could apologize for? Does that make sense? I'm not even saying that they weren't the more wrong. But just because they were the more wrong doesn't mean you were not some wrong. And oftentimes, it does take someone apologizing for whatever they were wrong in to open this up. So, what would our duty be? First off, to avoid all serious differences with to the best of our ability, don't get this place. Don't get to this place. And I would say not only that, to heal, to make attempts to heal at the first opportunity, the first smallest breach that you may feel. Because while a breaking of relationship, I'm going to use this phrase, may be beyond remedy, perhaps a small issue is not. Let me kind of, make it applicable to us. If you have an issue with a brother or sister in Christ and the church member, the Bible actually is very explicit about this in Matthew, is it 18? I'm thinking maybe in the Sermon on the Mount. But at any rate, talks about if you think there's something wrong, you go talk to the person. Don't ever say, well, they know what they did. Maybe they do, and maybe they don't. Say, well, how could they not know? Some of us are pretty stupid some of the time, right? Like this is not beyond the pale of possibility that we are completely oblivious that we acted in a way that we should not to. So heal everything at the first available opportunity. Consider that it's worth any sacrifice of money, position, goods to retain the love of people that are close to you. The Bible talks about at 1st or 2nd Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, I think. I'm mixing up a couple of verses, see if I can. Of course, I'm not going to. It talks about allowing ourselves to be defrauded and suffering wrong, right? It's the concept of, I'm not even saying that you're in the wrong. I'm just saying you ought to be able to be in the wrong and still do the right thing. And we ought to make an attempt to do that. A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city, and their contentions are like the bars of a castle. There's likely, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say, there's likely someone in each of our lives that you could probably apologize to and make things better. Maybe not. I'm going out on a limb and saying, but could you at least spend a few minutes trying to think if there's somebody that, hey, I could apologize to this person. I could say, I'm sorry. And don't make it one of those, remember that time when you said something really bad and hurt my feelings really bad? Well, I just want to apologize for something too. Like, okay, that's not that. No, that's, you're missing the point. Because I'm just telling you, that's probably going to make it worse, right? So it's an honest saying, I want to do what I can to restore the relationship on any level. I'm going to allow myself maybe to be wrong and try to win this strong. There's hope even in this verse. It says, it does not say, let me kind of play it like this. It does not say a brother offended is impossible to be won. This says it's harder to be won. So it's not that there's not even any hope here, but just understand your work is cut out for you. And but I would argue that a brother offended, it's worth doing some work for and worth putting yourself out. It says there are contentions. It says the clash, the conflict, the consternation that's caused are like the bars of a castle. You just really, and this is what it is. You can't get away from it. Think about what the bars of a castle. You can't get out of it. You can't get into it. They're always there. And I'm going to go out on a limb, and this may not be true for everybody, but you're probably thinking of somebody. Maybe not. You could be. Some of us could be. And all that's saying is that the bars of the castle are holding you. You know that there's a problem here that you could do something about, and the bars are there. And the only way to get rid of the bars is to bring the brother back to who it ought to be. We're gonna stop there. We'll only because I have quite a bit for verse 21 and 22, and I don't want to just speed through it just to be able to say we covered that much, and we'll come back to the end of the chapter. Hopefully it's given us something to think about. I appreciate your attention.